My name is Philippe Epailly, and I work at MTM, strategy and research consultancy that focuses on media, entertainment, and tech in particular. So something that's very much on our mind at all times. Right, by the way, if there are audience questions, please just put your hand up. Happy to address them as we go throughout or at the end. Now, why are we looking at that? Well, cost of living crisis is clearly here. Everybody knows it. We've seen toppling inflation rates of about 10% across developed markets, the highest it's been for over 30 years. The main culprits, maybe sometimes tomatoes and eggs, but oil and gas are also there. Energy prices are also at a record high, rising by close to 30% across Europe, depending on how exposed you are to oil and gas in particular. Now, what's the impact for everybody in this room and households out there in the UK? Well, household budgets are getting squeezed. Sometimes you have to make a decision over the winter, of course. Do I want to have heating in my home, or do I want to watch the latest shows and have access to 5 different SVOD services and pay TV? Of course, not everybody has that many services, but that's to some extent the question. Now, and what's the impact on consumers to that extent? Well, costs are high, so consumers are clearly looking for cheap and preferably free entertainment. Not always possible, but there has been a lot of talk about fast channels across these 2 days at the conference. So certainly a way that consumers welcome to consumer content. As part of that, during these times, they're also looking for a way to de-stress and relax. And in terms of what content they want to consume, well, it's comforting content. It's your classic TV series. It's the latest family movies they want to enjoy on a Friday night. Escapist content as well. It's reality TV. It's adventure content. So very much something that is addressing that need state in these times. Now, having a particular look at SVOD services, what you can see on this chart here is the penetration across the last 8 or so years for the 3 biggest SVOD services, Netflix, Prime Video, and Disney Plus in the UK. I've chosen the UK because the US is a little bit ahead of the UK, so the lines would have been a lot flatter and less interesting to present, to be honest. Netflix, for example, only had an average annual growth rate of about 7% over the last 6 years. Now, focusing on this chart here, we can see that Netflix and Prime Video certainly have had strong growth, as we all know. The line there that I've drawn, the dotted line, coincides with the time that the UK came out of the many lockdowns. Before then, very strong growth rates for Netflix, average annual growth rate of 23%, and Prime Video of about 50%. After that time, the UK came out of lockdown and realized, well, I'm not confined to my own 4 walls. I can do something else. There's outdoor activities I can do. Of course, we've seen somehow muted growth there, so the line pretty much going sideways with little to no growth at that point. The only major SVOD service that has seen significant growth since then, significant double-digit growth, that is Disney Plus, about 12% increase since Q2 2021. Now, what really helped Disney Plus is, of course, at the beginning, you can see that line there going up quite rapidly. Is they've got a strong brand appeal, halo effect from being Disney as well, and in the UK they actually had a predecessor called Disney Life. So you'll see that line pre-Disney Plus launch is going up ever so slightly. That's the Disney Life offer, which was more narrow. It was focused on kids' content only. Once the adult content was added on, very strong growth. Of course, the price also had a role to play there. Very competitive entry points they chose. So very good and popular with consumers at that point. Now, speaking of price, price is, of course, very important, especially to the biggest SVOD services, because Netflix, for example, is the market leader. So from their point of view, they want to bring consumers the best content, offer the best UI. From consumers' point of view, they also have the highest expectations to the market leader, and they want to watch all of the best content. Now, what that means during these times, but the chart here shows that prices have been going up gradually over the years. I think Netflix for the past 3 years had a price rise pretty much once a year. Prices have risen quite rapidly. So what we can see on this chart is the average revenue per user in the UK and the US, and how that compares from 2015 to 2022. Now that's gone up by 69% in the UK and 93% in the US. So quite significant, especially in the backdrop of rising prices more generally. And of course, lots of people don't just have one SVOD service, they don't just have Netflix, they have other services as well, which means costs are stacking up. And speaking of stacking up, what we can see here is on the left-hand side, the average SVOD consumer has about 2.5 SVOD services that they have access to, pay for, which is quite a lot. So if one of them is Netflix, they have access to 1.5 more. So it's quite a competitive space already. Despite this, and despite the backdrop of the cost of living crisis, we still see some room for growth. On the right-hand side is the future estimate, which is about 2.9, meaning there's still some room for growth, and that is across all age groups, 16 to 34s and the older age groups, really. And yes, if we look how that plays out for different services, that leaves some more exposed than others. So what you can see on this chart is the household penetration in the UK for SVOD service, a range of SVOD services. And then beneath that, you can see the stacking number, essentially. So you can see, for example, Netflix on the left-hand side. And an average Netflix user has access to 2.6 SVOD services, which, looking at this chart, is probably good if you're Netflix, because you don't have to split your time that many ways between the different services. On the other side of the chart, you can see Lionsgate Plus, the recently rebranded Stars Play service. It's quite a big number there, 6.6. So if you have a Lionsgate Plus, you seem to have access to a lot of services, meaning time is of the essence, and you have to split your engagement, your access to your frequency of accessing these services across many, many different services, which means you can see the penetration figure at the top there. Lionsgate Plus is the smallest service on this chart. It does leave smaller, slightly more niche services more exposed, because they really have to fight for engagement from consumers. It's, of course, a hard market because there's many new entrants into the market, and often raising awareness, cut-through is quite key, and doing that quite quickly to get to the masses. Partnerships have played a key role in that. The likes of Paramount Plus, Discovery Plus, and Apple TV Plus all have strong partnerships in place with Sky Cinema, Paramount Plus, Sky Q for Discovery Plus, both of those in the UK and the Sky markets in Europe. And then Apple TV Plus as well, where with the new device purchase, you of course get access to Apple TV Plus for 12 months. Now, that's great for cutting through, raising awareness, and getting into the homes. But of course, it's a fine balancing act, because the value you attribute to a service is also different, whether you pay for it or you get it as essentially a free service as part of that. Now, coming back to cost, we have a consumer tracker in the UK where we look at potential reasons for leaving SVOD services. We've been tracking that for many years now. The list is very long in terms of the reasons that we track. However, at the back end of last year, the results that we saw is that the top 3 reasons all relate to cost. We've got the number 1 there, saving money due to increased cost of living, directly attributing it to the rising cost. We've got the number 2 there, don't use it enough to justify the cost. Of course, that's where stacking comes in as well, because when you have access to multiple services and you actually pay for them, you really have to look at your use of each of those services and make sure, do I need that service, or could I cut that back and use, pay for something else elsewhere? And then number 3, they can't afford it anymore. These reasons really differ by services, and we see that Disney Plus in particular at the back end of last year has seen a high increase across those reasons. So users of Disney Plus are much more likely to think about the costs when thinking about paying for that service. That's particularly important because Disney Plus, of course, had a recent price increase as well. Right, now, ad tiers. Can they help? Because, of course, if you look at the last chart, you think, the likes of Netflix might be quite worried about people cancelling. And they have had some ups and downs over the last 12 months in terms of their subscriber figures. So at the back end of last year, their ad tier offer launched in the US and the UK, amongst other markets. In the UK, it was just in November, beginning of November that it launched. And the philosophy there is really that, looking at the last chart, is it a way that rather than cancelling, can we capture them via an ad tier? So not losing all of the money, of course the ad tier is priced slightly lower. Now, the other idea is that potentially you can unlock a new headroom audience because it's a cheaper offer. They wouldn't have subscribed to the higher priced tier at that point. Some very early figures that we saw here, of course, the ad tier isn't taken up by a lot of people at this point. Data here comes from the back end of last year. Only 14% of Netflix users on the ad tier are new to the service. So the theory about unlocking a new headroom audience might be a bit too early to tell, but so far not many people have joined because of that. On the flip side, 86% of Netflix users on the ad tier have downgraded. Now, the really key question is, and I'm afraid I don't have the answer, but the really key question is, those 86%, would they have all cancelled the service otherwise, or would they have, are they just looking for a cheaper deal and they would have stayed with Netflix anyway? Only time will tell, but that's a really key question that we'll be looking at throughout this year because there's a big focus on of course, the ad tiers launching in many more markets across the world. Right. That brings me to the end of this presentation. Are there any questions at this point?
Sorry. The count of how services are being used, what happens to a service that offers more than one of the services? How do you count that? For example, a Sky has a package of all of the different...
Oh, right, you mean the stacking number? Oh, so the stacking number is just relating to SVOD services. So a Sky, it would only count for Now, for example, the Now OTT service that they have. But one...
So it would not double count into the other services. For example, it wouldn't give one extra to premium video to Netflix.
Sorry, yeah, it would. So, for example, if I take myself, as the example here, I have access to 3 SVOD services. I subscribe to Netflix, Prime Video, and Paramount Plus. So my stacking number would be 3, for example.
But I have Sky, and I have all of those services through my Sky package.
Oh, I see what you mean. Sorry, yes. So Sky doesn't count, but if you have access to Netflix, for example, you would count as one. And if you have access to other services, Discovery Plus, if you've got Sky Q, you might have two SVOD services in that case. Yes,
okay,
they do
so
count.
It gets counted.
Yes, and the stacking number, of course, it's difficult to say because you don't actually pay for all of those. I mentioned partnerships. So if you have Sky Q, for example, you don't actually pay for Discovery Plus in that instance, but you still have access to it. So that's where the engagement is really key. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Question on that last time, the 86% were not new to the service. Are they all on the service already, or some of them like Winbacks left Netflix before but are not new to the service?
No, they're all they were all on the service before, and they're downgraded essentially. So they might have been on the standard, basic, or whatever it's called, or premium tier. Yes. Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah. service, do you have any stats around how much of that user base is retained after the premium version of the service?
I don't have any specific figures on that, but we do track the percentage that are getting it for free, and that figure has been by about 10 percentage points very stable over the last couple of years. But the new device purchases, it's not just for Apple products. I think I recently bought a printer from Currys or something, and I got the offer as well, which, to be honest, I was very surprised by. So yeah, I think they're playing a wide field there. Yes. Great. Any other questions? No? Okay. With that, I will try to take next. I will hand over to Martin for the next presentation.